Technology and Innovation Foundation, and I'll be your moderator today. We thank you for joining us for this ITIF co-branded event with the Embassy of the Federal Republic of Germany in Washington, D.C. For our event on autonomous vehicles and the future mobility, what role for government. We're going to be joined by an all-star panel to discuss the topic this morning. But if you'll allow me to make a few short minutes of opening introductory remarks, then I'll turn it over to the panelists and we'll turn the discussion over to them. So, if you go back through history, you could perhaps say that there have been several technology paradigms when it comes to vehicles. From their invention by Carl Benz in the 1890s, they were really mechanical contraptions up until about the 1950s. From the 1950s to 1980s, vehicles really became electromechanical devices with innovations such as analog brakes, electronic ignition, power steering, cruise control, etc. But starting in the 1980s and 1990s, vehicles really began to incorporate far more significant amounts of ICTs, information and communications technologies. And these were things like OnStar's satellite-based subscription concierge service, or XM radio. But now we're really entering into an entirely new era, where ICTs suffuse virtually every aspect of both cars themselves, as well as entire national transportation systems. This is really a new era of mobility 4.0 that entails the wholesale digitalization of the vehicle. And this manifests itself in new technologies and applications such as V2V, vehicle-to-vehicle integration. This is called, in some cases, SICAS, or cooperative intersection collision avoidance systems, where vehicles can actually communicate with one another to warn if somebody's trying to make a blind left turn, for example. They can detect a bad situation emerging and forestall it. Vehicle to infrastructure, V2I integration. This is going to allow vehicles to talk to the roadway, whether it's traffic lights. So no longer in the future will you have to sit at a red light. Your vehicle can actually signal to the traffic light. There's nobody else around us, go green, and you can move on. Cars that can communicate with the road lanes, with the traffic infrastructure. And even, of course, wholesale, fully autonomous vehicles. However, what's interesting, if you think about an unintelligent city, right? Think of the city of Chicago. The unintelligent city is really no different than the intelligent city. I'm talking about the mayor and the management of Chicago there, I'm kidding. But the point here is that the unintelligent city and the intelligent city look the exact same way in the sense that the ICT is behind the scenes. It's in the smart buildings. It's in the smart transportation infrastructure. It's in the smart traffic lights. It's in the smart sewers and roadways and bridges. So the unintelligent city and the intelligent city look no different from one another, and so it is the same with car. The intelligent vehicle, the BMW of tomorrow, will probably look like the BMW of yesterday, but it's going to be full of ICT devices and software. And in fact, when you look at the data, as much as 40% of the inputs into cars today are software, electronics, and digital services. So this is really the future. And as Bill Krenick of Texas Instruments notes, the advent of autonomous vehicles is going to be transformative as the shift in the prior era, really from the horse to the internal combustion engine. That's the extent of the golden age of innovation we're about to see in transportation. However, I think again back to Carl Benz, who famously lamented that the global market for his invention, the automobile, was only going to be limited by the lack of qualified chauffeurs. And just as it might seem like in the 1890s that the ordinary human, him or herself, would be unable to drive a vehicle, and so may it seem today that anything besides humans would be able to drive a vehicle. In fact, tomorrow we're going to find that automation, robots, and driverless cars are capable of doing the job just fine, and quite possibly and likely even better, more safely, and more efficiently than we can ourselves. However, if that is to happen, we really have to get the regulatory and the policy environment right. At ITIF, we'd argue that we're essentially in what economists call an S-curve, a transition from one technology system to another. And as we make this step change from the old technology to the new digitalized paradigm, this is going to require regulators to take a different approach to to be more open to innovation and experimentation while still maintaining the most rigorous vehicle safety and cybersecurity standards. For instance, as my colleague Joe Kennedy writes in this paper just released last week, which is out there in the back, on how regulatory reform can advance automation in transportation sectors, we identify several principles that should guide policymakers, including welcoming technology, acknowledging existing market and legal forces that encourage companies to act responsibly, allowing for different technology futures, distinguishing between substantially different technologies, providing regulators with sufficient resources to do their jobs, and making timely regulatory decisions. So with that as a backdrop and introduction, let me introduce our panelists who will carry the conversation from here. First, via telepresence, we will hear from Dr. Tobias Meithaner, who has served as head of the Digital Society Directorate General at the Federal Ministry of Transport and Digital Infrastructure in Germany since August 2014. Before that, Dr. Meithaner worked as a legal advisor and then as head of the Policy and Party Work Unit of the Executive Committee of Germany's CSU Christian Social Union Party. Dr. Meithaner holds a law degree from Regensburg and Aberdeen University, and he will share with us insights on Germany's new strategy for connected and autonomous driving. We will next hear from Michael Bultmann, who is Managing Director of HERE Deutschland, where he is in charge of directing HERE's external affairs and corporate social responsibility functions. Before that, with Nokia, he was also a managing director. Michael's also worked as an attorney in Berlin and Paris and is a lecturer on international business law at the University of Lüneburg. He studied law in Würzburg and the fantastically delightful city of Heidelberg, Germany, which I love. After Michael, we'll hear from Dr. AnneMarie Lewis. She is the Director of Safety and Technology Policy at the Alliance of Automobile Manufacturers, also known as the Auto Alliance. She previously worked at Booz Allen Hamilton as a technical advisor to ARPA-E, the Advanced Research Projects Agency Energy, and at the U.S. Department of Energy. She also served as a AAAS fellow for Senator Heidi Heitkamp of North Dakota, and she holds a PhD in mechanical engineering, natural resources, and environment from the University of Michigan. Last but not least, Paul Lewis is Vice President of Policy and Finance at the Eno Center for Transportation, where Paul directs Eno's policy research programs, including on transportation planning, mobility, and autonomous vehicles. Paul received his BS, Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering from Ohio Northern University and Master's from MIT in Transportation Technology. So with that, let me turn it over to Dr. Meithaner at the end of the table.
Hello? I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Probably you repeat the last sentence.
Tobias, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you. Well, I think in your introduction you already made the most important points. As federal government, we see that the topic of automated and connected driving really brings a lot of tasks for us that we have to cope. And we saw that, I think it was about 2 or 3 years ago, we saw that there are so many different questions which go along with the phenomenon of automated and connected driving that we had to bring all the questions together and to come to a strategy on automated and connected driving where we make a bundle of measures with which we want to go to that topic. And our overall aim is that we want Germany to get one of the front runners on this technology. We are very positive about this new technology because we think that it will improve road safety in a very good way. We think that 85% of all accidents are caused by human fault, and therefore we want to push this new technology. But furthermore, it's not only the safety aspect. I think it's, of course, a matter of convenience for the driver if he is able to use those techniques. And of course, it's also a question of the German economy. The automotive industry is, of course, one of our most important fields in our society. So in the end, we made a bundle of measures in 2015, and the federal government approved this strategy that we composed. And basically, we deal with three different questions. On the one hand, we try to get along with all the technical aspects of automated and connected driving. And this is especially, of course, research and development. And we also want to help our industry when it comes to testing. So what we did was to build up a digital testbed motorway on the motorway between München and Nuremberg, where industry is able to do all the testing it needs, and where we want to build up a so-called intelligent street. The second bundle of measures has to do with all the legal questions. We have lots of national but also international provisions that we have to adapt when it comes to automated and connected driving. And the last one is the question of acceptance of the people. And therefore we thought it was useful to set up an ethics commission where all the moral questions of automated and connected driving were dealt with. And just today, the results of this ethics commission were released, and maybe I can tell you something on that later on. But I want to make one point in advance, and this is about the amendment of our Road Traffic Act. It will enter into force tomorrow. And what we wanted to make sure is that as soon as we have highly and fully automated vehicles, they should be able to drive on German streets. So we want to make sure that this technique is not hindered, but that it can be used on German street as soon as it is technique is there. And the core of this act is that people in future will be able to divert their attention from the traffic and do mails, or will be able to surf on the internet during they are driving and during the situation where the car is operating the system and the driving task on its own. So that is the core of the of this new law, and I think we are the first country which makes that possible, not only for testing, but for the regular use of cars in traffic. And that was quite a difficult task. We had to struggle for that for quite a long time, also with other ministries. But in the end, I think there was a very good support from all over society, and therefore we were able to bring in this new law. But I can, of course, if you want, I can tell you more about the law later on.
Tobias, thank you. That's fantastic. Michael.
Yeah, first of all, thanks a lot for the kind invitation. A big thanks to you, Stephen, for the excellent introduction and for setting the meeting up. Thanks a lot to the German embassy making that possible and supporting this event. I think we are spot on with the topic, and please allow that within the next 5 to 6 minutes, I was told, I would like to give a bit of flavor about context, about how we see the mobility of the future evolving, and giving some of our observations, how we see and what we would like to see kind of doing or seeing for what the government can do actually to have us supported in the interest of society. First of all, I don't know to what extent you are familiar about what we are doing with Here Technologies. It's a compilation of a couple of companies. So it was Navtech in the US, most likely a bit more known. It was a startup Gate 5 in Berlin. It is now all under one brand, under Here. What we are doing since more than 28 years is digitizing the world and having the digital map available. So it started in the US, in California, when the first BMW 7er series drove through sunny California with the first navigation toy that came from us. And since that, a lot has really happened. So digitizing the world means we are present in nearly 200 countries with a very different quality of map. You know that in the United States or in Europe, the quality of the layers allowing autonomous applications like autonomous driving is of course more advanced than in parts of the world like in Central Africa, where there is some basic functionality available, but not allowing these modern technologies like autonomous driving. In the US, we have a bit of focus in Chicago, therefore I was a bit wondering about the Intelligent City. Clearly, Chicago is doing a lot in that area, and Illinois. So in Chicago, we have more than 1,000 people focusing on it. We have more offices in the United States, in California, in Seattle, working not only on the map, but a lot on intelligent application. The idea is, in very short, how we see it evolving is we have a platform in between, a data platform. We call it open location platform. Lots of data are coming to this platform. Data coming in the area of mobility, mainly from sensor data from cars on an anonymous basis. We are progressing, working with this data and playing it back to other mobility partners, not necessarily the cars. And this is, of course, allowing a lot of intelligent services in case of accidents, parking solutions, and allowing autonomous driving. You can imagine, and I'm very short on that because I feel that everybody in the room understands that pretty well, in times where you had GPS only, you had a tolerance of some meters. It was good enough for simple basic navigation. But when it comes to maneuvering a car into a parking slot, maybe we should not think about meters, but then it is about centimeters. It's about 2 to 3 centimeters. And that's exactly what we are working on with all companies around the world. So it's clearly not only BMW, it's not only Audi and Daimler, the consortium who is owning here, but it's clearly in the US, the General Motors, Ford, Chrysler, with whom we are cooperating and working on bringing that to the street. Clearly, as we see it, this platform is allowing a lot of fantastic applications in the area of mobility, and that's the focus of today. So we'll talk about mobility, and in the discussion, we really should talk about transportation mobility. But please allow the remark, clearly you can do more with that. Location intelligence, I clearly do foresee there is no industry which is not in need about location intelligence. And we are really in the beginning of developing the full potential of those applications. Think about retail, think about insurances, think about logistics. We are working intensely together with logistics companies. Think about drones. Of course, you need to know where exactly are the customers, where are the goods, and to bring that together. So location intelligence in a more complex world is fundamental for the future. When it comes to more the policy aspects, I mean, our business model is data, and I stop it here to make more jokes about it, but clearly it's 100% data-driven. So we need an environment to be successful with our platform business where data is not kind of the exception, but all the underlying rules and regulations are kind of extremely adaptive and open to the use of data. So what we need is a data culture. That flow of data, access to data are really on the latest status, and this is kind of really open system. This is not self-evident, in particular if you see that the legal frames all over the world, that applies to Europe to the same extent to the US or in Asia, is of course coming from the analog world. And there are some barriers. I'm not talking only about the privacy laws. This is something you can modernize to a certain extent, but all the other rules, starting from competition law to admission laws with mobility solutions or cars, this is still a bit analog. And in digital times, we need to kind of think about how to reform and how to work on. Maybe 2 examples, and Tobias, the robot on the left side, alluded already a bit to that. The role of authorities and government, from our belief, is really changing. So I remember when the first Mercedes S-Class was developed in Germany, in Stuttgart, when the guys from Daimler together with us went to the authorities, the first comment was kind of, maybe not. It's not really in line with the laws. But the second thought and reflect was, but it's interesting, and most likely you need it, so let's partner. And this is something I think we should think more about, that the government is not in the role of kind of blocking and looking always on the existing laws, but working more on exceptions. We need to play more. And that was what Tobias was saying when in Germany this Motorway 9, this test field was kind of inaugurated. We joined that effort together with a partner and worked on this high definition map for that area. And now we are playing with partners, we are learning, and this is important. And we know in the United States we are contributing on state level to some projects in Ohio, for example, in Colorado. And I can encourage everybody to see more of that. So we have some limitations when it comes to the resources. We cannot join every activity globally. But clearly in the US it's such an important market, it's so innovative, we are happy to join those efforts and support it clearly. This is the first observation about regulatory topics. The other is clearly, when it is about privacy, we need to overcome the thinking of data protection in a very narrow sense. We need to kind of really incorporate the security and the privacy principles when designing the products, when really starting the efforts. Then the concerns and risks need to be taken into account from the very first moment. And of course, these concepts, what we are discussing, regulatory concepts like consent, we may ask the question whether consents in times where consent is needed every second. If you're sitting in such automated solutions, maybe the concept of consent in a classical way is maybe not really the right one in modern times. So what can we do? I'm not saying that we have all the answers there, but we clearly need a culture, a new data culture where the use of data is embraced and where people are seeing the benefit and the potential of data, in particular in mobility, where it is about safety, it is about security, but it is clearly as well about sustainability and participatory effects. Take an example, we all know from the statistic, and you know that much better than I know, and hopefully the numbers are right for the US, but the traffic in the cities, 30% of the traffic has to do that people are looking for parking opportunities. Maybe it's only 25, but 25, this is really a lot. And if you could bring that down, if you guide people in the car, there are 3 alternatives, and you can make click, and then the mobility solution, I'm no longer talking about a car, is bringing you then to the parking slot. Just great. Only one example, but you can really do a lot with the consumption and everything else. I stop here. I'm very much looking forward for a discussion with you and, if possible, with the audience. And once again, thanks a lot for having us here in this discussion. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. AnneMarie, you're welcome to come up here if you'd like.
Okay, sure.
Or take it from there, wherever you prefer.
Great. So good morning, everyone. My name is AnneMarie Lewis. I'm the Director of Safety and Technology Policy at the Auto Alliance. It's great to be with you here today. For those that aren't familiar with the Auto Alliance, we're a trade organization representing 12 of the major OEMs in the U.S. So it's fantastic to have an opportunity to talk with you about AVs and the future of mobility. So in my talk, I'm going to highlight a few trends that we're seeing with regard to the future of mobility, and also outline some policy issues that we think are critical for the successful testing and deployment of these vehicles. But first, I want to take a minute and highlight that there's been a continuous trend towards automated driving features. ADAS systems or ADAS features are available on vehicles that you can purchase today. And it's actually the continuous evolution of these features that have led us to the fully automated vehicles that you read about in the news. So the 4 trends I want to highlight are there's an increasing amount of connectivity and automation. Second, there's a lot of new entrants and partnerships in the space. Third, there's an increase of ride sharing and advanced mobility concepts that are being introduced. And fourth, most importantly, an increase in vehicle safety. So increasing automation and connectivity. Vehicle manufacturers are testing highly automated vehicles all over the country today, in many states, in fact, all over the world, and it's great we can have an international conversation on that today. They're testing in diverse range of environmental and roadway conditions, and this is really critical in order to develop the test data used to train the AI algorithms on the vehicle. So that's an important point. Secondly, they're also testing and developing connectivity technologies. These can be between vehicles and other vehicles, vehicles and other road users, vehicles and infrastructure, including maybe back to the manufacturer, enabling things like over-the-air software updates, which is a really cool technology. Also, so the main question a lot of people want to know is, when are the vehicles actually going to be here? When can you buy one? So it kind of depends on what level of automation you're talking about. Levels 3 and 4 will be here within 1 to 5 years, and level 5 is going to be a bit further out, 2025 or later. But when we talk about vehicles being on the market, it's important to recognize that the average age of a vehicle on the road today is about 11 years old. So it's going to be about 4 decades or longer before we start seeing these vehicles everywhere. And I don't have time to get into the different levels of automation, but I wanted to throw this up. If you want to learn more about it, it's a great resource by SAE. J3016 is the standard. So we're also seeing a trend with new entrants and partnerships in the space. I'm sure all of you in the room are probably familiar with some of the major tech companies we hear about, like Google. Waymo spun out of Google to work on self-driving cars into last year. We also have companies like Argo AI that's a spin out from Carnegie Mellon University. They actually got bought by Ford earlier this year, and for $1 billion, which is a significant investment. We're also seeing a trend of established companies making new investments in the AV space. So Intel is a great example of this. They acquired Mobileye earlier this year, so expanding their reach from not only chips, but now into vehicle sensors. And we're also seeing partnerships. The one I mentioned of Ford acquiring Argo AI is a great example, but there's many others. And third, we're seeing a trend of more ride-sharing and advanced mobility services being offered. Vehicle manufacturers have announced plans to roll out highly automated vehicles, as I mentioned, and a lot of these plans have included plans to roll out vehicles in a ride-sharing fleet. This also goes back to the trend of new partnerships that we're seeing. I think it was just last week that Jaguar Land Rover invested in Lyft. GM's also invested in Lyft, and Uber is partnering with many OEMs. So there's a trend for increased partnering in this area, sharing fleets, and we'll be seeing that on the roads. Sorry, I think I needed.
Oh, sure.
Sorry, mouse catcher. So we're also seeing a trend for advanced mobility services. This is really important when it comes to providing mobility to the elderly, the disenfranchised, disabled, and this is going to be happening in increasing numbers. There's also a trend towards delivery fleet service providers. Vehicles can be deployed in platoons, thereby reducing congestion and getting from point A to B faster, lowering their environmental footprint, and really changing the way that we think of for how goods are delivered to the homes. And lastly, we're seeing that all these trends are coming together, and they're going to be increasing vehicle safety. In 2015, over 35,000 fatalities occurred in the United States alone from traffic accidents, and sadly in 2016 this number increased. We think that by removing the human out of the loop, or at least partially out of the loop, we can really reduce things like distracted driver behavior and decrease these numbers. In fact, in the United States, 94% of traffic accidents are caused by human error.
Not in the US, everywhere.
Yeah.
That's globally the case, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a human.
So lastly, I want to end with a few policy recommendations that we have. Basically, it comes down to, one, removing existing barriers, and two, having strong federal leadership. So how can barriers be removed? Well, as we've heard in Germany, we need to take a look at the existing law, and in this case in the US, it's the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards, FMVSS, and you need to take a look and ensure and maybe make amendments to provisions that could preclude the use of HAV deployment. We also advocate for an increase in vehicle exemptions from FMVSS. Currently, the cap is at 2,500 vehicles per manufacturer for a duration of 2 years. This number needs to be dramatically increased to provide manufacturers with the certainty that the high capital investments they're making now can be realized on the roads in the future. And secondly, strong federal leadership with regards to what's happening in the state. So clearly, there's a lot of state activity with regards to regulating AVs. We think that there's an important role for states. Traditionally, they've taken care of things such as insurance, liability, licensing, registration, traffic laws, and enforcement. And this is all great. Also, taking a look at existing state laws and reducing any barriers there is really important. For instance, New York has the one hand-on-wheel law. But we think that the vehicle design requirements should be kept at the federal level as traditionally done. And so this is a great way for NHTSA to play an important role. So that being said, we think that there are profound benefits of AVs, societal, economic, environmental, and safety. And we're looking forward to working with various stakeholders, including you all in the room today, to further discuss this important technology. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, AnneMarie. Paul,
Great.
why don't we get that perspective from the ENO Transportation Center?
Sure. So Paul Lewis with the ENO Center for Transportation. For those of you that might not be aware, we were founded 100 years ago by a man named William Phelps Eno, and he's actually very relevant to the conversation today because in the late 1800s, he was caught in a traffic jam in New York City in a horse and buggy and was traumatized. It was chaos. There was horse manure everywhere. Nobody could get around. And there was also this new thing on the road called the automobile that was proliferating very rapidly. And he recognized that if we didn't bring some kind of order to that chaos, we weren't going to go anywhere. And we couldn't utilize this transportation asset called the automobile. And he became the father of traffic engineering. And he developed the stop sign, the traffic circle. He wrote the first rules of the road for anywhere in the world, implemented in Manhattan and then spread across the planet. And because of that regulation and because of that environment in which the automobile could operate, we were able to take advantage and grow our economy and grow our mobility options. And we're faced with a similar challenge today. We have a ton of problems. We have very rapidly growing GDP, rapidly growing vehicle miles traveled, limited street space. We're not expanding our roadways very much anymore. And we have this other problem called safety, where we're seeing an increase in deaths. We also have the environmental and climate change worries that are coming up quite a bit. And at the same time, we're seeing the coming of automated vehicles. And so, much similar to 100 years ago, we now have not only an ability, but really a responsibility to create an environment where the automated technologies can start to address some of these larger concerns about economic mobility, safety, equity, and environment. And so my organization is a policy think tank. We've looked at this from the policy lens. So not so much what can the technology do, but how can we take what the technology can do, work it into our policy framework at the federal, state, and local level in terms of regulation, infrastructure investment, preparing the workforce, conducting research, in a way that can take advantage and encourage the kind of technology that we'd like to see. So we embarked over the last year on a pretty extensive effort of talking to folks, many of you we've talked to in the room here, and tried to get a really good sense of what should be the appropriate actions at the state level, what should be things that cities should do, how should the federal government respond. We've released 2 papers. They're available on our website. I encourage you all to check them out. And in general, A lot of it is taking the existing framework that we have, and much like AnneMarie said, it's making tweaks to that. It's reducing some of the barriers, it's changing some of our investment programs, and it's encouraging the roles of the respective levels of government to continue doing what they have done in just a slightly different way. For example, the federal government has long been involved in regulating safety. They've been for decades with federal motor vehicle safety standards, making sure that the cars on the road are safe. And the same thing would apply to automated vehicles. And it's incumbent on the federal government to take a leadership role in setting a framework so that we can encourage a performance-based certification system that we know that these technologies are safe, and it demonstrates to the general public that, yes, we can move forward, and you don't need to worry about the technology as it's been certified as safe. And then on the other hand, the state roles of licensing and permitting and insurance and liability, that's going to remain at the state level, and it's incumbent on the states to update their laws, to improve upon them, to work with their neighboring states to ensure some kind of consistency. The role doesn't change, but the way that it's structured is. And then same goes to city agencies, transit agencies. How can they change their policies to allow for the testing, to allow for some of the pilot projects, and eventually allow these technologies to proliferate within their agencies and on their roadways in a way that achieves broad public sector goals. So I wanted to thank Stephen for putting this together with ITIF and the German embassy, because I think it's really important that the U.S. look to its partners abroad. There's a lot of really smart people working on some of the really challenging issues that policymakers are facing, and I think that the more we get to talking with each other and really opening our horizons, some of the solutions to some of the most pressing policy challenges will become more evident. So I'm looking forward to the discussion today.
Thanks, Paul. You know, we wrote a paper at ITIF called Explaining International Leadership in Intelligent Transportation Systems back in 2009. This was my first ITIF report. But it was interesting to me that Japan had deployed this system called the Smart Way, kind of an integrated ITS system. And they went from concept planning to deployment in 3 years, from 2004 to 2007, a period in which our Department of Transportation was taking 5 years to study the technological feasibility of a program like that being implemented. So the point there is not to denigrate the good work that they do, but to say that there is real opportunity in the space to learn from leading international partners. So what I'd like to do is ask a few questions of the panel, and then give you all in the audience the time to formulate your own questions, which we'll take briefly. There are a few more seats up at the front if folks in the back would like to come up. As a first question, however, I'm going to come over here. Tobias. If you were there, Tobias? Yeah. So this is the German strategy, the strategy for automated and connected driving. And I thought I would ask Tobias, and maybe Michael, you could chime in as well, if you can. The question is going to be kind of what prompted Germany at this point in time to put this policy in place, what compelled them to do so. We'll get Tobias back, and I'll ask him that, but maybe we start then just by asking if our panelists wanted to respond to or amplify any of the remarks they heard their fellow panelists make.
One quick observation, and I think that was an extremely important comment. I think the industry needs global answers. And maybe a comment from the sideline, because clearly I'm not the expert in the United States. And but if possible, it is, in our view, always good to have solutions which are fitting everywhere. And we have the discussion in Europe. So in Europe, if France is doing something, that has limited relevance. If Germany is doing something, that has the same limited relevance. So it is only good if the car autonomously can maneuver over the border, and the technologies are kind of consisting. And this is, of course, really crucial. And bringing it really on the global scale, we had a discussion about unifying, having an interface for the data exchange. And we called it Sensores, and we started the discussion in Europe. But we learned very quickly there's huge appetite and interest in the US. And in the US, we learned, well, the guys in Japan are interested as well. We invited our competitors, we invited all the OEMs, the suppliers, and now the standard, we are proceeding on this standard. And this is, of course, global applicable. And a company like Toyota is earning not only money in Japan, and Ford has really an interest that the technology is kind of working everywhere. So if there's an opportunity and a possibility to bring that on a kind of highest level possible, this is clearly in the interest of industry, just as a player, to have that in mind always.
Yeah, and from the Alliance perspective, we wholeheartedly agree that international collaboration and cooperation is essential where we can. You know, there's big differences in the way the U.S. Regulates vehicles versus in Europe. You know, in Europe they have a type approval, which is more of a pre-certification. In the U.S. we do self-certification by the manufacturer. But the Alliance is participating in international forums, including with the UNECE, to have conversations about how to learn from each other, and especially for AVs, we're facing similar challenges, so where we can harmonize.
Paul? Yeah, I mean, most of the discussion about harmonization in the U.S. revolves around how does one state work with the other state. But I think that in the automated vehicle space, as my fellow panelists mentioned, is that it's really an international thing, and it doesn't stop at the border. And particularly if we're going to market these technologies, it has to be something that can work in Canada, can work in Mexico, can work in Germany, can work in the U.S., because that's how people travel. The political maps with lines on them often have no relevance to how people move around, and and it's not just people too, but it's also goods. And if we really want to have an efficient economy, that's how we have to think about it.
I'm tempted to ask about data storage or data localization policies, because we've seen an increasing number of countries put in place policies that would try to compel enterprises to store data locally. And even, obviously, we've had issues with creating regimes for the movement of data between transatlantic countries. What would these types of data localization policies do to the potential of the future mobility for these technologies to be deployed? Seems like we should get a TTIP done that would kind of ensure these types of transatlantic data flows.
For us, we have a pretty simple view on that. We would, of course, encourage all approaches which are allowing and facilitating transfer of data. I mean, we would need to make a bit of distinction between data. There's always in the discussion when it comes to data localization and where are the servers, it has to do a lot about what kind of data we are talking. And then we are coming, of course, to the data where persons and people and consumers are more involved than in others. But clearly, the tendencies of storing data and limiting the exchange is clearly not in the interest of innovation. So we would encourage, of course, and this is a global statement, has nothing to do with Europe or with US or Asia, but in general terms, I think in digital times, and we had a digital revolution, data is really most likely you are bored about the term, it's the oil of the industry, but it's really true. I mean, data is everything, and big data is not a word which is as such good. And honestly, we have a lot of colleagues who are working more on destroying data, because there's so much data available, but the focus needs to be clearly on finding the relevant data and have that then quickly transferred to the places where it should be. And I think it's not only in the interest of economy, this is important. Yeah, of course we have an interest, but clearly, and we had heard good examples about safety, security, and the environmental aspects. It's clearly extremely relevant and important for the society.
Okay, let me ask one more question. So nations provide subsidies for the purchase of electric vehicles, presumably because doing so is in the public interest by lowering greenhouse gas emissions, for example. We've clearly seen that the advent of driver assistance technologies in the vehicles already, let alone fully autonomous vehicles, can have significant impacts in improving safety. Is there a compelling public interest for countries to provide subsidies or offsets for A, purchases of vehicles that have advanced driver assistance technologies in them, and then B, for even autonomous vehicles?
Well, from the Alliance perspective, we're not asking for such currently. I'll note that There are other cost factors to consider, such as the cost for premiums for insurance will likely go down as vehicle safety improves. There's also, it's also important to consider that these vehicles are going to be likely deployed in different ways. In ride-sharing fleets, we think that people are still going to own vehicles, but we might see more ride-sharing opportunities.
Maybe if I can quickly, he's back? The robot?
I'm back again, sorry.
Tobias, fantastic. Can you hear me now, Tobias?
Now I can hear you. I hope it stays like that.
Great. A question I wanted to ask you was why Germany felt compelled at this particular point in time to introduce the strategy for connected and automated driving. Why was now the right moment?
Adam, could you please repeat it? I didn't get you acoustically.
What was the reason, why did you feel compelled in Germany at this particular time to articulate this strategy for connected and automated driving? What were the internal forces inside German government and politics that said we really have to do this now?
We think that the topics are so important that it needs a discussion on all the legal and technical points before we can get that technique on the street. And we already know that according to our manufacturers, the first highly and fully automated vehicles will be on the streets between 2018 and 2020. And we thought that it is too late to start the discussions when the technique and the cars are already there. But we need to have rules when they come, because if a driver has such systems, he must be able to know, can I let the system drive on its own, or do I always have to watch the traffic and to take the complete responsibility? And therefore, we thought it is important that we have regulation before the technique is on the street. So that was the motivation why we tried to get on as early as possible. And now we think that we have legal certainty both for the manufacturers. Now they know how the systems have to look like, that we say, okay, these systems are mature enough to give the driver room to do other things when the system is activated. And also the driver has legal certainty, the consumer, because he knows if a car manufacturer says this is a highly automated vehicle, then I, as a driver, am allowed to use it in a way that I can do different things during the activation of the system.
Fantastic. Michael, did you wish to amplify that?
Yeah, it's a bit of I would like to quickly come back to the topic about incentives and e-mobility. I'm a bit careful and reluctant to immediately ask for incentives. But clearly, going back to the first point before about data, what we know from surveys and from polls, why these systems haven't been widely adapted and there was some hesitation, has not only to do with the hardware, so the performance of the car as such, but people are uncertain about the kind of being lost and having not enough power and being somewhere in the countryside and cannot take it from there and proceed. And if there is kind of reliance and software can help on that, again, the intelligent use of data can help. If it is completely clear and we know from the past, from the data, where is the next charging station, and in this charging station it's working, you have the right payment method in your pocket, then there will be confidence in the system, and then people will really embrace and will buy if they can rely on the system. And that with data and intelligent software, I think you can do, I would not say miracles, but you can do a lot.
Fantastic. All right. Well, we have about half an hour to take questions from the audience, so I'll take them in the order in which I see them. If you would just say your name and the organization you're with, that'd be great. Go ahead. Here we have a microphone for you. It's on.
Carl Zabel with Net Choice. Question for Michael, and now that we have Tobias back, I'm happy to see that. One of the concerns that we've heard is with respect to level 3, where the driver has to be kind of in this between fully autonomous as well as having to be hyper vigilant. They found it takes about 10 seconds for people to come back from maybe texting to say, oh no, I got to turn, or there's an accident coming up. In looking at laws, as you put out these rules, did you just kind of jump over level 3 and go straight to level 4, the highly autonomous hands-off? And then as a second question, did you need to update your laws to allow for the New York example where you don't have to have a hand on the wheel or a foot on the gas pedal, because some of these cars may not even have a wheel or a gas pedal? I'm getting a blank stare from Tobias.
Got the question?
I don't know, Michael or AnneMarie, if you can address that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take that one. And we've looked at that pretty extensively and trying to see how that technology, specifically level 3, would play out. And you're right to point out that there's this weird in-between where the car is there, the vehicle system is expecting to the driver behind the wheel to take over. And so what we've been saying is that there needs to be some kind of standard amount of time that the vehicle has to still maintain control before it hands over that control. And we need a little bit more research to determine whether it's 10 seconds or 20 seconds. I mean, that's something that we can figure out through a rigorous research approach. And then once we set a standard, then it's up to the technology developers to figure out how to solve that problem. And so government's role is much more in setting the performance target of having a safe system with a acceptable amount of transition time, and then letting the technology figure out how to work that. And if the ultimate solution is that level 3 doesn't work from a technology standpoint, then maybe we skip over it. But you should let the technology figure that out before the government does.
Yeah, I'll just chime in that many of the Alliance members are interested in level 3 and doing a lot of research in this area, and this is one of the points why testing is so important, to figure out how the takeover is going to work. And currently, as I mentioned, we're advocating for increased exemptions. This includes level 3 through 5 to figure these types of things out.
Hi, I'm Dick Mudge from Compass Transportation and Technology. And I guess I'm very impressed with how calm everybody is. It seems to me we're on the edge of a revolution in transportation that could be as big or bigger than anything that's happened before. And everybody, I guess, sense I get from the panel is maybe we should work around the regulations a little bit, but other than that, we'll just wait a while. It seems to me there should be something more. I guess the frustration I have is should be something more that we could do to speed deployment. We don't get the benefits until we reach a certain market penetration. Stephen asked what I thought was a very good question is, should we be doing subsidies? We have subsidies for solar and other things, and no one seemed to like that. Is it that are you saying we should wait another 10, 15 years to see what happens? Or are you just so confident that the technology is going to be there, public sector doesn't have to do anything? I'd be a little less calm.
And I think we need to go one step at a time. There's a lot of regulatory issues to work through. So currently we have to work through the existing barriers to getting them on the road. And then I think we can start having those types of conversations.
And I'd say that just the technology has advanced tremendously in the past couple of years. I mean, it's really remarkable. Even a year ago, we weren't having discussions like this. It was kind of the automated vehicle discussion was kind of novel and new. And now it feels like pretty much every day there's a new discussion about it. There's folks getting together, talking about the challenges, the opportunities, the barriers, and how to overcome those. And so I think there's a lot of optimism that the technology is coming very quickly. And I think that the governmental role in encouraging it is not to encourage the technology per se, but to encourage the outcomes that we want to see. If you remember 10 or 15 years ago, the government put a lot of money and a lot of resources into encouraging ethanol and biofuels. And that was all we talked about. And that didn't really play out. And now all the discussion is around electric vehicles when it comes to encouraging that alternative fuel. And maybe there's a new technology that comes along the way that we haven't thought of yet, and in 6 months the whole paradigm is going to shift. I think that there is a role for government to encourage technology, but not focused on deploying electric vehicles, but more getting the outcome of more sustainable transportation through whatever means the private sector and really, really smart people that are developing these technologies come up with.
Just to quickly echo, I think this is an observation we are fully sharing. I mean, it depends a bit on the understanding of where you see the role of the government. But technology, and I do not have a very strong technical background, but if I see the speed of development, what is possible within sometimes in weeks, to kind of, I would leave the freedom clearly there and the liberty within the industry to proceed on innovation and leave it more to the government, sorry with my more rusty English, but you worded it very nicely, to set the right incentives to say, well, we are looking for a sustainable society, to see certain rights of the individuals protected. And in this frame, which is quite flexible, leave it to the providers and to parts of the industry to come up with solutions for it. But of course, you can ask for a more active role in government to see certain things pushed through. Understood.
If I may add something, I think that we cannot completely leave it up to the industry, because when it comes to traffic solutions, we also have to see how the streets and all the infrastructure has to be implemented. And that was one of the reasons why we try to build up this testbed on the motorway, the R9, because we think that it's not only the cars which have to interact, but it's also car and infrastructure which have to communicate in future. And we'll have to make sure, for example, that we will have a proper 5G rollout along the streets. And so I think that these are questions that also the government and politics have to answer and to work on.
So Germany's government is co-investing with the private sector in this A9 federal motorway in Bavaria, this digital motorway testbed. So two questions. One, Paul and AnneMarie, is your sense that we have the sufficient infrastructure we need in the United States for this type of testing? I know there's a facility in Michigan now. Also wanted to ask, I noticed that the German strategy calls for a stepped approach to allowing experimentation with these vehicles. You can drive at a certain kph in the city environment, at a certain kph on the Autobahn. Is this kind of stepped approach a good way to think about the introduction and testing of these vehicles?
Yeah, I mean, I would say when we see pilots all over the United States, and a lot of times they don't get a lot of press, but even here in Virginia, Transurban has opened up their hot lanes on 95 and 495 for testing. Ohio has a test bed. Michigan, of course. A lot of universities are, and some of the sports arenas are piloting driverless shuttles. I mean, the pilot environment and the testing environment is very real, and a lot of it is in direct coordination with public sector partners and private sector partners that are offering up their roadways to try this technology out. And I think we're seeing quite a bit of it here in the U.S.
Eagles Milberg, Center for Accelerating Innovation from Seattle. My question revolves around data-dependent autonomous vehicles. Two questions. One, what's the risk with regard to cyber hacking? It seems like there are all kinds of vulnerabilities that are possible in order to mess up collaboration between vehicles or individual vehicles operating, etc. So I'm curious what the public responsibility might be in terms of maintaining security and integrity of the data system. The second question is, government's very involved with insurance and auto insurance, and in case of an accident, who's responsible? If it's a software problem, algorithm problem, you can't sue make the driver responsible. Sounds like there's an enormous liability issue coming when it comes to autonomous vehicles.
I can jump in with regards to the first question to start off with. So in 2015, the Alliance and Global Automakers founded the AutoISOC. So this is actually an industry-led proactive initiative to share information on potential cyber threats. So this work is ongoing. It's actually, they're able to share data through a third party, and it's actually been working quite well. They're developing tools using security by design methods to develop hardware and software, also working with suppliers who are partners in this AutoISOC to ensure that they're ready to counter any potential threats for autonomous and connected vehicles. So,
And
maybe I can also
Tobias, go ahead.
answer your questions according to what we are doing. I mentioned the amendment of the Road Traffic Act at the beginning, and what I told you about the content also affects, of course, the question of liability. Because if the driver of such a highly or fully automated car does use it in a proper way, and for example, doesn't watch the traffic and an accident happens, then it's, according to our act, it's not him who is liable, but it's in the end the car maker, the producer of the car, because he was able to rely on what the producer said. So he doesn't make anything wrong if he activates the system in the way that he still can react on takeover signals. But in general, he doesn't have to watch the traffic, and if something with the system goes wrong, it's the manufacturer who is liable for the system. And with regard to the cybersecurity question, this is also one element of our strategy on automated and connected driving. And we installed a so-called data group where we tackle the questions of cybersecurity as well as the questions of data protection. And we also have members with technical expertise. So we have a Federal Office for Information Security, and we try to use their technical knowledge to find out together with the automotive industry how we can make sure that these systems work properly. But I think in the end it will be necessary to have international standards, but what we're trying to do is to make sure that there's a basis on a national level, and then we will implement it on an international level.
Pages 22 to 24 of the strategy address cybersecurity and data protection very effectively, I think, so it's worth looking at. Here, please.
Hi, Sean Kimmel with Booz Allen Hamilton. Thank you for bringing together such a diverse set of perspectives, and I really like the international aspect of this, so my question's going to be in that vein. We've heard about some of the differences in regulation across the ocean here with pre-certification versus self-certification, and also some of the different testing activities going on. Where are there opportunities for harmonization? Where is there maybe rich areas for collaboration or areas where regulations can be harmonized?
Tobias, if you heard that one, you could take
Okay,
it. Or
sorry, I was out for a minute. If you just could repeat the question, because the system broke down for 1 minute. Maybe you can repeat it for a moment.
Yes, where are there areas that are rich for international collaboration, maybe in the research realm, or areas where regulations could be harmonized?
I think there are lots of areas where harmonization is necessary, but I think the most important ones, of course, are those where technical standards are set, because the OEMs, of course, have to build cars for every city, for every country in the world, and therefore we have to set common standards, for example, in the field of cybersecurity, but also with regard to other questions. We therefore set up a working group of the G7 transport ministers, and they try to coordinate those activities. By the way, there is a meeting of the G7 transport ministers from tomorrow till Friday. I think the US transport minister is also represented in Italy, where it takes place. And one of the 3 topics they will tackle is indeed automated and connected driving. And this was also the main topic of the last 2 meetings of the transport ministers. So you see that everybody sees the need for international cooperation. And when it comes to standards of cybersecurity, or when it comes to questions of how can a black box look like, which says, was it the driver who was responsible for the driving task, or was it the system? These are technical features which have to be harmonized. And so we think that G7 is a very good, to make sure that that we coordinate that.
King G with the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, AASHTO. I have a two-part question. Paul mentioned at the very beginning in his comments about safety certification. And so the question is, who does the certification? And I have a problem with the federal policy right now in terms of operating domains. It's left to the automaker to decide what the operating domain is. So if you have self-certification on domains that the automakers set for themselves, how do you get interoperability? Secondly, related to that is the question about liability. Currently, we have tort liability with crashes, but if I heard the German colleague correctly, you're talking about moving the liability to potentially a product liability framework. And so has anybody thought about what that does to remedies for injured parties? So certification and then liability.
Yeah. Well, when it comes to certification, this is something that the next phase of our research is trying to dive into. How do you actually do that, and how do you who's defining the domains, who's doing the certification? Is it self-certification? I mean, generally we see it as something that's very performance-based, is where it should go, and you know, the folks developing their technologies will know in what environments it can best work, and how that fits into the framework, and that's somewhat similar to how the levels of automation that SAE has released line up. And I think that also leads into the liability question. The different levels of automation provide a very clear framework about who is responsible or what is responsible for the driving. And so I think when we start thinking about liability, and it's not who's responsible, but it's more of a question of what is responsible for the driving. For example, if you're in a level 3 or 4 vehicle and you punch the automated driving button and let go of the steering wheel, that liability is shifting from tort, from the human being to the automated system. And we need to have an insurance framework to make sure that if there is a failure on part of the system, that the insurance of that manufacturer or automated vehicle technology company is able to cover any kind of at-fault collision.
Maybe just to quickly add on, this is indeed the crucial point. The industry is always not worried, but it needs to be really clear who is in charge. So the moment of the handover, if the system is in charge, then it's pretty easy. Then it's indeed going more to this kind of, as you worded it, a product liability, because then the system is obviously an issue. But if you have control over the car as a driver, then it's still the driver. But this period in between, what we alluded to when talking about the seconds and then maybe an optical acoustical signal to take over control, this is a crucial point. But if it's really clear on the safe side who is kind of then driving in that moment, I think liability should not be the main worrying topic to proceed.
I'll just add, in the UK, I know there's an insurance company that is already offering an AV policy. I think there's one in Germany as well, so we'll be seeing more and more of this being worked out. And just maybe a clarifying point on the operational and design domain. So that's, and if technology developers that's part of the design process, is they would likely design a vehicle for a specific operational and design domain. So that's kind of, when you buy one of these vehicles, you'll know what its limitations are.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Spalding from Auto Nebula, and this has been a great panel. I've heard you talk a little bit about data and infrastructure needs and current trends, and I've heard some of the questions that have been asked kind of pointing to this. But what do you think are the key hurdles or technology gaps keeping us from deployment of fully autonomous solutions in the marketplace?
Really, it comes down to the ability to test in a range of diverse conditions. you go across the country and see different sort of roundabouts or features in roadways that the vehicles would need to be trained on. So essentially, you need to develop a data set that covers the right kind of data, also time of day data, environmental conditions, all these different factors coming together and being used in machine learning algorithms. So that's on the testing front. I think your question was technology-based, not regulatory. So, or key hurdles. Okay, so so I think I mentioned in my talk the main regulatory hurdles. It's mainly the limited cap on FMVSS exemption being $2,500 per manufacturer per year. That's a main hurdle, and dealing with a patchwork of regulations coming out of the states on vehicle design.
Yeah, and I see there's two main hurdles, and one is on the policy side, and that's where we need to reinvent our frameworks and kind of redesign things that can be permissive and allow for these technologies to deploy. And then on the other side, it's a barrier with the technology. I mean, it's in its infancy. It's not really here yet. In the past 8 days, I've been to 4 different conferences or workshops or panels like this one on automated vehicles. And in every single one, there's been a problem with PowerPoint or a problem with the live stream, right? I mean, these are technologies we've had for a couple decades, and they're failing on us. And in a panel setting, it's annoying. If you're driving down the freeway at 60 miles an hour because you depend on that technology to get you to work, it could be catastrophic if there's a failure. And so there's no room for these technologies to make an error. And so we still have a long ways to go to make sure that they're safe and we can integrate them into the broader transportation network in a way that we can depend on them, that they don't shut down when it's raining or there's snow or there's other kind of weather event or what have you. So the technology still has a ways to go, and I think that whatever we can do to encourage that development is good, but I think we're going to have to see how that develops and when it comes out.
Maybe just to quickly echo, I don't want to defend completely the technologies, and I'm the victim of some PowerPoint presentations, believe me. but to balance a bit the kind of concern that in case there is no coverage, then we would immediately see fatal crashes or big problems. I mean, clearly, if there would be no coverage, the internet would have an issue, or as we saw with Tobias, the transmission, there was a loop into what would happen to an autonomous vehicle. Well, it would simply give some signals, go to the right side of the lane and would stop. So this is not convenient. This may be annoying, but it would not be immediately a catastrophe. This is, I think, important. Another hurdle, what I'm a bit seeing, and so societies are different in that. In some parts of the world, there is hesitation, clearly. And there's not, I think we need to do more on the acceptance side, that people feel not too well with the idea that there is no one around. I mean, we saw that not only in case of cars, but in other mobility solutions. I mean, planes. Who's taking the job of a pilot in principle? I mean, to what extent, how many percentage when an airplane is flying is done automatically or with the help of a pilot? 90% is automated. But if you would say, well, the pilot can go home, I think a lot of people would say, no, maybe I'm not flying today. And we see that with other transportation means, with subways. We have one subway in Germany where is nobody in. That raises massive concern. There is nobody. Is it really needed that always somebody is in? I'm not sure. But this is as well a very emotional topic for a lot of people. And in some parts of the world, people are a bit hesitant. So much data. There are concerns. And we have to work on that. We have to be, as an industry, very transparent. Explain clearly where are the datas, what you can do, how you can impact. If this is granted, I'm sure that people are more and more interested in. Thanks.
I want to follow on that. I'm Tim Johnson with McClatchy, a media company. I'm curious about your projections about the lives saved in the future over this. Is it going to be a gentle downward trend, or is it going to take the 4 decades that you mentioned for autonomous vehicles to be on the roads? And then secondly, related, this emotional issue. I think as a driver, I feel like I could evade a drunk driver on the road. So there are 35,000 deaths now. I can't evade a rogue algorithm. Is that part of the problem, is that people just feel that there's so much randomness in the technology that they'd rather take the risk of something 10 times more dangerous than something that's known to be safer?
Yeah, I guess in terms of safety, we're not seeing a downward trend right now. We're actually seeing an upward trend. The past couple of years, deaths on the roadways are increasing. And it's not quite clear why. I mean, part of that's part of a recovering economy, but it's also because we're more distracted by technology. So technology might be a big cause of why we're seeing more roadway accidents, and perhaps it could also save us in the future. We haven't seen that downward trend start yet. And I think that automated technologies could be a big part of it. But again, I think that it's part of it is an adoption rate. It's going to be, even if the technology were ready tomorrow, it's going to take a long time before it proliferates and gets into the wider the wider roadway use. And then at the same time, it also is going to be something where the people have to accept it and people have to trust it, and that's going to be incumbent on the developers to demonstrate that it's safe.
However, I do think that it's important to note that we're already starting to see significant improvements in vehicles that are leveraging these driver assistance technologies. For example, an Institute for Highway Safety report recently found that vehicles with collision warning systems have seen a 7% reduction in vehicle-to-vehicle collisions. Those with automatic braking systems, a 15% reduction. And going forward, some studies have noted that these technologies may be able to prevent as much as 53% of rear-end collisions. So we don't have to get to a fully driverless state for the types of technologies that the industry is developing to deliver significant safety benefits. Now, that the other factors, increased miles being driven by the population, may lead to increase in accidents. But these technologies are already saving lives and decreasing fatalities.
Absolutely.
And listen, the reality, as stated earlier, is that 94% of accidents are the result of human error. In fact, just 1% of accidents on U.S. roadways are a result of technological error or technological failure. So while it is important, that we introduce these new technologies propitiously, I think regulators should recognize that their overwhelming potential is to significantly decrease the potential for accidents and fatalities.
And it's only a matter of time before those technologies become mandatory because of the reasons you listed. I mean, the semi-autonomous features are already making a big dent. Absolutely.
Thank you for taking time to answer all of our questions. I'm Everett Helm with Whitmer and Worrell. So in the beginning, we talked a lot about the intelligent city and transforming that setting into an environment that's friendly with these intelligent vehicles. I'm from a small town in North Carolina called Weddington. You've never heard of it, I'm sure. Where does kind of the unintelligent rural countryside fit into this whole scheme? Will cities kind of adopt to this first, and then it'll be decades before we see that sort of technology employed in those small areas? Or
so as was just alluded to, we're going to see safety benefits immediately from these vehicles. I mean, even if they're not operating in a urban center in a ride-sharing fleet type mode, personal vehicles with increased automated driving features is going to increase the safety of the vehicle. So we're expecting a lot of benefits to come to more urban areas.
I think I would add, there is no kind of revolution and it will make boom and then the world is automated. So it will be an evolution. It will go really step by step. And I mean, all this mobility concept, what we are experiencing in dense urban, if you go to Mexico City, and I was in Delhi 2 weeks back with more than 22 million people, their requirements about transport and their needs are completely different if you're coming. I'm from countryside as well, so I do clearly foresee that cars have a future on countryside for a pretty long time. But these shared concepts, all these applications, I mean, the mobility of future will take place more in the cities first. And then we have special lanes, we have mixed traffic, we have lanes with automated systems, and we have more the traditional ways of transport that will all goes together in different speeds. So that will not be in one point in time. It will take a bit of time, but this is, I think, not a major problem. This is kind of normal. In all the discussion, I mean, we know, for example, when these fasten the seat belts was implemented into cars, there have been even court cases in Europe where this is limiting the freedom of people. That was really discussed. There was a court decision in Europe where people were saying, well, yes, it is limiting the freedom because you have a seatbelt, but in the interest of the security in traffic, it is okay to make that mandatory. And this is exactly the same thing which will go step by step in evolution.
And I just to add, I think the rural areas actually have the most to benefit in the short run. If you look at District of Columbia, very dense, very urban, there's 680,000 people that live in D.C., and there were 20 deaths last year on the roadways. If you look at Wyoming, a state that has not 680 but 580,000 people, very rural state, they had 148 deaths last year on the roadways. And the number one cause of those deaths are vehicles departing the roadway lane. And that is something that the technology that we have right now can address. And so I think from a safety standpoint, rural areas have the most to benefit, and I think that's where we can encourage this kind of semi-automated technology that we have to address those kind of concerns right now.
To that point, I also found interesting in the German strategy that its very first action item is, quote, ensuring basic universal coverage across all of Germany of internet access of a speed of at least 50 megabytes per second by 2018. So their very first point is to expand the digital infrastructure so those types of solutions can come into the environment. I'd also say something as prosaic as like computerized adaptive traffic signal lights, right? So just knowledgeable traffic lights have been shown to be able to reduce city congestion by 40%, greenhouse gas emissions by 22%. So there are technologies already existing that can significantly enhance mobility. Let's see, we got, I think, one question here, then I'm going to have one final set of questions for our panelists, and we can wrap it up. And back to you here, sir. Right for you, Nathan.
Carl Zabo, NetChoice. With respect to the insurance question, because this has come up a lot, I've spoken to a number of insurers about this. Do you really see a need to upend the entire system? Because if there is a collision, and remember we're talking a significant decrease in collisions, you'll be able to identify the person who's harmed. Then they will go to the vehicle's insurance first, the owner's insurance, and the owner's insurance would then look to see if there was a manufacturer's defect or the system failed. So do you really see a need to totally upend the insurance operation just because it happens to be an autonomous vehicle as opposed to a person driving?
Well, let me start. I think I'm clearly not representing the insurance industry, but from all the discussions, what we see, the business models will change. I mean, if we have more transparency into behavior, into data, of course, you may ask the question, is individual insurance to the models as we know today, is it really needed in the future for this mass transport? Question mark. Do not have a perfect answer on that, but you may ask exactly that question. But on the other side, there may be different models. And we had some discussions with insurance companies they are looking into and trying to see, okay, there is a lot of opportunity but the traditional way of proceeding, I think these times are in a way a bit over. And so there's a lot of disruption into all these markets. And it has to do, sorry if I'm boring on that, it has to do with data.
So, Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao recently announced that the Trump administration is looking at an update to federal regulations and updating the patchwork of state rules, as she said, in governing autonomous vehicles technology. I wanted to ask the panelists if you've heard things today that you think are important that should feed into the administration's new strategy, and also if you have any kind of sense of timeline on when the administration might be coming out with these new guidelines.
So I have no sense on the timeline, but I know that it's something that they're working on, and we do have some folks over there that we know that are working on a lot of these things. And look, the federal automated vehicle policy statement got, I think, 1,300 or 1,400 comments from many of you in the room, a lot of folks that experts, industry leaders, a lot of people had a lot to say about them. And most of the comments were just making tweaks, improving on what the framework already says. And so I think that's going to be the approach that the administration takes. And generally, it's going to be moving that ball in the right direction. And the advantage that we have is that we're a little proactive in this. And in many ways, government is reactive. Once a technology is proliferated, then they kind of say, oh, geez, what do we do about it now? In the terms of automated vehicles, they're just now starting to roll out. It's a new technology, and we're at a really good point to start thinking about this strategically. And the one advice I would have is look abroad. Let's not just look at what we're doing here. Let's look at Germany. Let's look at Canada. Let's look at the UK. Let's see what they're doing. Let's see if we can copy any of the good things, and of course avoid any of their mistakes.
Yes, I was actually at ESV when the secretary made the announcement, and it sounds like it'll be later, the end of the summer type time frame, but we'll see. In general, be it through the FAVP or otherwise, I would really hope that they take into consideration having strong federal leadership with regards to what's going on in the state. Sounds like her remarks indicated that they also recognize that, and just in general, addressing the barriers to get the vehicles on the road to be able to gather not only test data to advance the technology development, but test data to inform future rulemaking, because that's also very critical. I don't think we've highlighted that yet, but this data is necessary to actually draft the new FMVSS that are needed.
All agreed. Maybe only two quick observations. First of all, law will never be perfect. And I would claim, and I'm not criticizing, but the German approach clearly is not kind of, well, is it now ready for the next 10, 15 years and all questions are answered? By no means. And this has been acknowledged. And that would be the recommendation and the learning clearly. In highly innovative environment, having a kind of flexible frame in place is a good signal for the economy and gives enough certainty. But remaining flexible, this is really important. And this is, I think, the striking. And the other one I like a lot to see, let's not look only in kind of the usual suspects, but I agree, Canada is doing a quite good job. There are some extremely interesting initiatives in Japan, in Korea. So these are all players who have exactly the same topics. And from our point of view, the humble view of the industry, clearly coordination and alignment is clearly something what we would like to see clearly much more than as of today.
Well, as ITIF writes, in the coming transportation revolution, when autonomous vehicles become majority of cars on the roadways, we anticipate that will lift American GDP by at least $1.5 trillion a year as a baseline, while delivering significant productivity, safety, and environmental and ecological benefits for all Americans. So we're excited about the potential of these technologies for the future. I want to thank first all of you for coming out today. It's been a great discussion. I would like to ask you then to help me thank our panelists for their tremendous contributions. Thank you. Video of this event will be online by the end of the day, and we look forward to carrying this discussion with you into the future. Thank you.
Thank you.